Assalamu alaikum, everyone. Welcome to our second last week, where I've been covering week by week of my book, Transformed by Values. Alhamdulillah, we are moving towards the last few topics. This is actually not the end of the book. This is the end of part 2. Part 3 is quite advanced. But if you've gone through part 1 and part 2, you will find that part 3 is just the natural progression of what you've been learning and practicing. So today's topic is all about the only thing in life that we have absolutely cannot, stop or slow down or control, and it's time. Time is the essence of everything that we are and everything that we do. Once time is up, it's gone. So, subhanAllah, there's so much in Islam on guidance about the importance of time, which I'll be sharing today. So I'll be covering the perspective of time from a Quranic perspective, a prophetic perspective, then talking about how can we master how we use the time, the short time that we have. Then I'll be going through what we call the 4 different ways. There are only 4 ways we can spend time. And I love these categories. When I learned them years ago, it really helped me to observe the different ways I was spending my time in a much more effective way. Then we'll look at what we call the different time orientations and how that affects our state. And then I'll go through some classical, but what I have experienced as the best of the best over the last 20 years in terms of the best time management tips and strategies. So inshallah, I will get started. Let's close that up and we will make this bigger. So, okay, let's go, inshallah. So the quote here that I've created for me sums up this chapter. And it's basically saying that what is managing time? It's really about managing yourself. Because we can't control time, we can't stop it, slow it down, speed it up, but we can only manage ourselves. In other words, our goals, our values, our life. So, and why is that so critical for us? Because when we meet the owner of time, subhanahu wa ta'ala, we will learn what exactly we did with our time, and we will receive the consequences, inshallah, or good, from how we spend our minutes. And subhanAllah, there are 86,000 seconds per day. So, Islam is all about accountability and awareness. So inshallah, this chapter is going to give us huge advances in how we experience and spend our time, inshallah. So let's start with the Islamic awareness of time and the knowing that really what is the true value of time. Well, for me, this quote sums it up. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala swears by time in Surah Asr in the Quran, which is the starting point of the value, the real value of time in Islam, where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, by the token of time throughout the ages, verily man is in loss, except such as have faith, do righteous deeds, and join together in the mutual teaching of truth and of patience and constancy. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is swearing by time. So in other words, it's highlighting for us that time cannot be compared to anything else. There's nothing else you can compare time to in terms of the value. So it's immeasurable, and more so because we know that this life is short. It's like, you can place it next to eternity, and this life is like 5 seconds, subhanAllah, in the, if you want to do a mathematical algorithm. And subhanAllah, the Prophet ﷺ likewise urged us to consider the wise use of our time. He says, there are 2 blessings which many people lose, health and free time for doing good. So here he's highlighting to us that time is, one of the biggest blessings, because time is life. Our time is our life. And so we have to act upon, things in our life to ensure that we are making use of this blessing in the best way, inshallah. So for us, it's a warning that life is short, and that the only thing that's left in the end is the results of how we spent our time. So that's why I've written here that success is actually a matter of how do we spend our minutes during the day, doing our best for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's pleasure. That really is a success formula for us, the high success formula as a Muslim. And in the end, there's nothing more painful than regret over time wasted. There's many, many stories of, that in the next life, the one thing that people will wish they had more of was even just to come back to earth for 5 minutes, subhanallah. So we really need to up our awareness and prioritize how we think about time and how we experience it and what we do with it. So it's all about consistently being conscious of this, reminding ourselves regularly, even just reading these hadiths regularly and building, a library of things that can remind us. So let's take it to the next level. Let's look at, the perceptions of time, starting with the Prophet ﷺ. We know that it was, you could summarize it in one sentence. It's all about accountability to Allah for every blessing. So we know that he didn't waste a minute of his time. He always had this sense of urgency, yet a balanced urgency, in spending every minute of his life to prepare for the final destination. And so all his life was really directed towards, using time in the best way. And so as a result, the concept of the akhirah was not this far away kind of concept. It was really his daily reality. That's why he said to us, remember your death every day, because it's a big way to just zoom, manage your time effectively. When you remember your death, you remember, that this could be your last day. And so you maximize your time. So how these simple strategies are powerful ways to enhance your actions and behaviors, towards your Islamic values and the life you're leading. So we know he was the most productive Muslim ever. We know that he had so many responsibilities, so many roles in life, yet he was so skillful in his time management, and the essence of that was the fact that he had a powerfully purposeful, mission-driven life. And so that's, the greatest sunnah for us to emulate in deciding what is the purpose of my life, and really honing in and crystallizing that in our heart, in our mind, writing it down, connecting with it regularly. So now let's look at ourselves. What are our perceptions of time? So here's the first activity, where I want you to reflect on your beliefs about time, because that's where we start with, how do I even think about time, So let me ask you to think about this sentence, because this will help. So say to yourself, time for me is, okay, and see what pops up in your head. And that's just giving you a little bit of a, indication on how you represent time. How important is it in terms of, the correct way to think about time from an Islamic perspective, For example, time, an ideal way is that time is a trust from Allah, or, some people might think time is always on my side, or time is never on my side, or time is always too fast, time is always just... So we had so many, I would recommend maybe you grab a piece of paper and you just write all the things that you think about when you think about what does time mean for me, and then reflect on, are these beliefs that actually are supporting me or they're hindering me, and then put yourself in the shoes of the Prophet ﷺ. Okay, what would he say time is? Let me now adopt those and affirm those daily, inshallah. So find out the beliefs of people who manage their time amazingly. What kind of beliefs do they have that helps them? Because the beliefs are like the roots of the tree. What you're believing about something is manifesting in your behaviors, in your thoughts, in your patterns, So your job is to find out what beliefs about time would support me in the goals that I have in my Islamic values. And so considering how effectively do I use my time towards living my Islamic values, because that's the bottom line. For example, how much of my day can I estimate is spent actually living and practicing my values, or, in terms of my awareness, in terms of my intention, etc. What do I need to improve? What will I do? What steps can I take? So that's the starting point. So now let's talk about this concept of really getting into the reality of time, because really time management means goal management. It means managing what activities are taking up your time, what goals are taking up your time. So which means, of course, then planning needs to happen so you can choose and select your goals and work on those, so that way that you're living a goal-oriented life, a value-oriented life that you have deliberately planned and laid out a map. I mean, you wouldn't go to a destination without a Google map, or some kind of map, and just say, okay, I'll just go with the flow. No, life is so precious. We don't want to run the risk of missing out on the highest potential that we have and pleasing Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala through this kind of conscious way of looking at life. That way we are pre-deciding what our life needs to be about. Living according to them means mastering. Living according to our goals means mastering how we spend our time. So that's why I put the goals is the next chapter in the book, because you can't have one without the other. It just won't work. Our goal in life really is not to manage time, but to manage our values, our value-based goals. Yeah. So they're one and the same as Muslims. So after you've created your goals, then these time management strategies will work for you. But nonetheless, I put this chapter here on purpose before it, because it's and I realize because I realize it's the prerequisite for goals. So let's just have a look at a quick time management summary that I've done. So step one is prioritizing. Step one is deciding what my priorities and values need to be in life, based on my goals, my clearly defined and clarified and crystallized purpose and mission and life goals, which are broken down then into monthly and quarterly goals. And I've got the easiest system, in the next chapter that I live by and I taught for many years. So there's no excuse for not living by goals. I remember years ago when I used to start and I did different types of goal seminars, I'd do them and practice them, but I wouldn't follow up. It was like, no, it's just, there was things missing, the gaps or whatever. But, in putting this content together over the years, I've put together what I felt was missing in order to be able to really follow through and simplify, basically, and make it easy to follow and live by goals. Step number 2 in time management is all about first things first. It's about managing your goals by putting them first, day by day, a moment by moment, and living by them. Number 3, organizing and acting around your goals, around your priorities based on your goal system. So here are some time management strategies that it's up to you to explore and to see which are best for you. But they're definitely things that you cannot, negotiate with, because, they're so critical to managing our time. So things like diaries and calendars to schedule your goal activities, notebooks, journals, checklists for the details. Exploring different organizational methods. I've probably gone through about 5 different organizational methods until I found one that just worked perfectly for me. So that's up to you to find one that just, it just simplifies things. It helps me, to manage my days, my activities, my goals. Creating your plan at the start of the week. So based on the goal system that you have, reviewing them daily in the morning. And part of that will be setting and blocking out time slots, for the activities based on your goals. So these are just a few key fundamentals, in terms of time management strategies. And of course, each one of these can be, a whole workshop on its own. So that's up to you to explore. Using a weekly planner is essential because day by day doesn't work. When you have a weekly planner, it means that you can schedule them out, you can space them out, you can balance the week, you can plan in advance, it's more flexible. And of course, this will be based on the goals that you set. And Prophet Sallam also used a weekly schedule. He had certain activities that he taught us, that should be done on particular days and things like that. So, how do we make sure that our goals don't get hijacked? Then is the next question, because sometimes unexpected things happen, short-term, long-term, urgencies arise. So the key for us is to decide, how is this connected to my goals, my values? And then from that, we make a decision. Because otherwise we'll be living by other people's goals and we'll be wondering, what is the meaning of my life? I don't even feel connected to who I am and what's really deep in me in terms of what I want my life to be about. So as a result, effective time management really is about initiative, proactivity, and self-motivation. These are the three key things that are required for effective time management. So if we're not committed to goals, then urgent things are going to consume our life. Reacting to things is going to consume our life. We're going to assume it's important, if we haven't clarified and decided what's most vital for us in our life. So again, these are all things that I'm talking about, and they become simple to implement, with these kind of strategies, especially again, with chapter 13 next week, which I'll be showing you how to put these into practice. So let's jump now to the different ways we can spend our time so that we know, where does my time go? We want to audit our time before Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala audits, just like when you've got, like it's tax time and you've got to account for every dollar. Where did it go? Well, when we meet Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, we're going to account for, every part, there's a Quranic verse I'm going to be sharing in a minute where it talks about how we will, be accountable for every aspect of our time. There'll be things that we will be questioned about because our time belongs to Allah. It's a trust from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Okay, so these are the four categories which are very, they're just so succinct in terms of thinking about the different ways. So I'll go through each one at a time. So the first category is called urgent and important activities. Okay, so these are things that we need to manage. So what am I talking about here? I'm talking about important, immediate needs, deadlines, important crises, problems occur. We can't avoid them. We can't limit them. We have to manage them. Yeah. But here's the thing. Urgent situations can sometimes occur unnecessarily because we didn't spend time here in this second box working on things that are not urgent, but they're important. They're things. This is the box where our values are, our value-based activities, our goals are. This is where we need to focus the majority of our time. Because if we don't, we get thrown into this box with urgent crisis situations with our health, with our deen, with relationships. For example, if we're not planning, following up with our self-improvement, things like that, with habits, etc., then we get thrown into urgent situations, So that's a really powerful way of understanding the relationship between our time and realizing we have to do the preventative, the root work here, so that the urgencies don't consume us, and our life becomes focused on our goals, on our values, on our purpose and mission in life. So this second box here, again, it's this is where our goals planning, and we need to be 100% in charge. We need to realize that, we are 100% in charge of the results in our life. So we need to, again, be proactive in acting upon those things. Otherwise, there's consequences. Problems become bigger, stress becomes bigger, suffering becomes bigger, etc. Okay, and what about sorry, just jump there, the third box here, this one. So this is the third way we can spend our time on activities or things, situations that are urgent, but they're not important. What do I mean by that? And these are the things we need to limit. So things like other people's urgencies, other people's priorities, sales, urgent situations, the news, so in this third category, this is where we need to put boundaries and limits. Otherwise, it can take over, and how do we do that? With self-discipline and having our goal system, and being able to delegate and say, no by having a bigger yes, where it's practical, of course. And then the fourth way in which we can spend our time is where something is not urgent and it's not important. Okay, so in this way, these are things we need to avoid as Muslims. So what are these kind of things? You're probably already guessing, time wasted type activities, spending many hours on social media that have, nothing to do with, any particular benefit or goals, watching things or activities that just to pass the time. So the whole point is not to say, okay, we have to be every minute, purposefully driven. But, for example, we need to have free time. We need to have time where we switch off our minds. We need to have time where we, do relaxing things. That needs to be part of our plan, though. Do you know what I mean? So that way we can make sure everything's tied into our well-being, tied into our goals. So that way we avoid the risk of being addicted to time-wasting things, and being in a situation where we lose track of time. So okay, so that's those four categories. So what the activity coming up is going to prompt you to use those four categories and then evaluate yourself. Where am I with those? Because it's better to know now and do the homework before we meet Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So again, Prophet sallallahu warned us about wasting time, and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala as well. In the Quran, he says, verily, the hearing and the sight and the heart, about each of those you will be questioned. I remember when I read this verse, I just froze. I hadn't actually read this verse, but when I was putting this book together, I was researching particular verses connected to the content. And when I saw this, I was like, whoa, this is really powerful, So everything we are watching, everything we are hearing, everything in our heart, Allah is saying we will be questioned, because at the end of the day, the hearing and the sight and the heart belongs to Allah. It's a trust from Allah. It's a gift from Allah. So we want to use it in the way that's divine, that's based on the beautiful teachings of Islam. Prophet ﷺ as well, he said, the son of Adam will not be dismissed from his Lord on the day of judgment until he's questioned about five things: his life, how he lived it; his youth, how he spent it; his wealth, how he earned it and he spent it; and his knowledge, how he acted upon his knowledge. SubhanAllah, this again, each of these is just, a priceless jewel of wisdom for us in mastering the way we spend our time. SubhanAllah. So the next activity is, as I said, it's about exploring your time usage. So here the activity that you can do is all about reflecting on your habits. So I've given you the 4 time management time options, 4 ways we can spend our time. So your job is to start to reflect on your average week. Maybe take the last month, and just add a rough percentage, how much of my time is spent on things that I have to manage, urgencies that are important. How much is spent on things that are not urgent, but they're important? How much time do I focus there? Okay, like prayer. We do have, of course, we have a time frame. We've got, for example, a gap of a few hours in between each prayer. So that's the idea there, I suppose. how much time am I spending on things that I need to limit or things that I need to avoid, that are completely outside the scope of my well-being as a Muslim, Then once we do that, we can now ask ourselves, am I satisfied with the way I'm spending my time? Now that I know a bit more accurately, what do I need to change? And so recording our thoughts in our journal and making a plan for how we can improve that. And now thinking about, well, what would my ideal week look like? How much time do I want to be able to, be in this, in terms of the ideal week for me. So subhanAllah, I remember when I did that first time, again, it was a big eye-opener, because sometimes you just assume, it seems like the way I spend my time is okay. But when you actually sit down and think about it, and in this activity coming up, when I did this activity, it was just mind-blowing. When you actually audit, the blocks of time during the day, in terms of how many hours do I feel, minutes, or, do I feel I'm actually spending, in towards anything connected to my Islamic values, It could be an activity where my intention is to please Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Well, that's beautiful. That's definitely, an example of something that's, meets that criteria. So it's about you discovering, how satisfied am I with the way I spend my time? What do I want to improve? How can I improve? What, making a plan to take some action. What would be the consequences long term if I don't change? So again, subhanAllah, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says in Quran, verily to us will be their return, then verily for us will be their reckoning. So these are kind of verses that we want to regularly read, to power up our motivation about being really conscious and consistent with managing our time as effectively as possible. So I'm going to stop there, or I might just finish off with this last part. So it talks about in this last part how states are related to the orientation we have of time. So as we know, our thoughts can be in the connected to something in the past, something in the future, or present. So our states are often impacted by the time frame we're operating, right? Where we're putting our attention. So, for example, stress sometimes might happen when you feel like you don't have enough time in the present to meet the demands, So shifting your attention to a future time frame can actually just help you to, put a pause and diffuse that stress and change your state and be able to better manage. So something as simple as changing your time orientation is really a great way to improve your mastery over yourself, over your life. So there's a few examples there. So for example, if if the present is stressful, become more resourceful by focusing on something in the future. So perhaps the reward you'll feel when what you're doing is has been completed, or something that puts you in a more positive frame of mind, so that stress chemicals don't kick in. So that way you're breaking your state, neutralizing it straight away, so that you can manage your state as effectively as possible. So, for example, in terms of time orientations, it's useful to consider what are some of my patterns. For example, someone who lives too much in the future tends to avoid dealing with or thinking about the present life, right? Becomes a bit of a struggle. So the opposite of that is to have a balanced perspective. So, for example, someone who uses a future time frame in a balanced way, visualizing, achieving their goals, etc., then they're able to break that habit. So if you find yourself worrying too much about the future, jump into a future time frame, Think about something in a future time frame that puts you in a good state, so that, again, it's just a matter of managing your state with these simple changes. Or the other example, someone who lives in the past, who replays past things constantly. Obviously, this is going to give, a lot of unnecessary suffering. So the opposite of that is, someone who uses the past time frame in a balanced way, right? And uses it as a result, they're able to learn from it rather than get stuck in it and experience or re-experience pain. So knowing your time frame is really important, and so that you can shift when you feel you need to, and one way to discover that in a bit more detail is to do this activity where you reflect on, what time orientations do I favor in which situations, for example, and it's not always going to be one or the other, but, for example, in a family context, work, personal life, are there preferences that I have, or in certain scenarios, perhaps, and what are the implications, positive or negative, of the time orientation I have in those? What would I like to do to improve, and what steps can I take? Okay, so I'll finish off there. So there's a lot that we've covered in terms of looking at time from the spiritual perspective, looking at strategies, looking at the different ways we spend our time, etc. So inshallah, again, take these step by step, practice them in your own way. Ensure that you're using some kind of journal to evaluate, to note things down. That way you get a sense of control, and you feel that you're making progress because you can see it, it's written. It can be very, very simple. So, all right, thank you so much for joining today, and I hope you'll join us for our final webinar next week, inshallah, where we'll be covering goals, and that will just really put a fantastic way of closing the part 1 and part 2 that we've been going through, and that way you can start taking all these ideas that we've talked about and really start to see them bearing fruits in your life, because goals is where it starts to happen. Goals is where the habits happen. So until then, we'll see you, inshallah. Take care. Assalamu alaikum.